Just that one. We are gathered at UCLA on the 10th of October. It's October. 10th of May. To debate the policy question, reducing carbon emissions is a good policy for mitigating global warming. Reducing carbon emissions is a good policy for mitigating global warming. On the government, Bianca and Ellie. On the opposition, Rana and David. Okay, you can slide that way and that way a little bit, each of you. Okay, we're golden.
Hi guys, thank you all for being here today. We're going to be arguing about a resolution analysis based on a claim of policy. So Ellie and I constitute the proposition, or the government, arguing that the reduction of carbon emissions is a good policy for mitigating global warming threats. So to begin, we're going to do some definitions, which include A, carbon emissions, emissions of carbon, especially in the form of carbon dioxide as a contributor to global warming, straightforward enough. B, policy, a principle or course of action adopted or proposed as advantageous, especially formally advocated by a government. C, mitigate, to lessen the trouble caused by evil or difficulty. D, global warming, a long-term gradual increase in the temperature of the Earth's atmosphere and oceans associated with side effects of recent human activity, such as the increased production of greenhouse gases, and all of those are sourced from the OECD Oxford English Dictionary. To establish the criteria, you guys should decide based on whether carbon emissions should be reduced to mitigate global warming due to the benefits outweighing the costs. So cost-benefit analysis is what we ask you to judge the debate on. So what's the problem? Because human activity in the form of carbon emissions is the driving force behind climate change, we must take immediate action to reduce these emissions and stabilize the climate, ultimately avoiding catastrophic consequences for the future generation and the natural world. Our first assertion is that carbon emissions from humans are contributing to global warming. According to an assessment of climate change studies published in 2013 by the IPCC, there is a 95% certainty that human activity is the dominant cause of observed warming since the mid-20th century. NASA also asserts today that global temperatures are about 0.8 degrees Celsius higher than before the Industrial Revolution, when we started burning fossil fuels and therefore reducing carbon emissions. The principal force behind much of this warming is increasing carbon dioxide from these emissions. Furthermore, the evidence for human influence on the climate system has grown since the last IPCC report, and in 2014, the organization stated that it is extremely likely over half of the observed increase in global temperature from 1951 to 2010 was caused by the anthropogenic increase in greenhouse gas concentrations. And we'd like you to focus on the word anthropogenic, which means human caused, in case that needs to be clarified. Even the skeptical environmentalist Bjorn Lomborg himself admits that, quote, global warming is almost certainly taking place, end quote. As a result, these human-induced issues have catastrophic effects on both human and natural systems. So I'm going to be focusing on human systems in my debate, and Ellie's going to elaborate on the natural system effects later on in hers, but impacts from recent climate-related extremes, such as heat waves and wildfires, reveal significant vulnerability and exposure of some ecosystems and many human systems to current climate variability. The problem is huge, affecting several aspects of not only human life, but the natural order of the planet. And the first impact I'd like to talk about is on water resources. We all drink water. Look, there's mine, there's Ellie's. All of you have bottles too. And according to the Environmental Protection Agency, not only do we need a reliable, clean source for our health as drinking water, we also need it for agriculture, energy production, navigation, recreation, and manufacturing. Many of these uses put pressure on water resources that are likely to be exacerbated by climate change, and that ultimately increases water demand while reducing shortage. So it's kind of like a huge inverse problem which we need to tackle immediately. Then it also damages the quality of the water and our ability to use infrastructure to transport and deliver it to different places around the world. The second issue is increasing incidence of severe weather. According to NASA's 2015 fact sheet, global warming has the potential to result in more wildfires, droughts, and tropical storms, which caused $1 billion in damage in the U.S. in 2012 alone. The destruction of infrastructure in local communities also causes several human health issues, like disease transmitted when water and sewer systems are not working properly, as well as a tremendous loss of human life. Global warming is also projected to undermine food security, which is another way it will affect our human world. Major changes in crop yield will cause food price to rise, which is terrible for our economy, by the way. And according to U.S. Global Change Research Program, carbon emissions are causing warming in California's Central Valley, which significantly reduces the yields of tomatoes, wheat, rice, maize, and sunflowers, which I'm sure you all like to eat several of those items. I know I do, especially sunflower seeds, which are delicious. The IPC finally concludes that global temperatures increased by 4 degrees or more, combined with increasing food demand due to a growing population, would pose large risks to food security globally. One of the other ways that the increase of global warming due to carbon emissions will affect our lives is through the impact on human health. According to the National Climate Assessment, the first way this is possible is through the decrease in air quality due to ground level ozone. I have cousins in Malaysia who can't go shopping or walk outside their houses even without wearing like three-ply face masks, and it's disgusting, and I don't want to wait until that happens to me to find out whether or not climate change is real, to be honest. It also is related to increased hospital admissions and emergency room visits for asthma, as well as premature deaths. The second is the increase in extreme heat events, which is the leading weather-related cause of death in the United States. Cities like St. Louis and Chicago have suffered dramatic spikes in death rates during heat waves, resulting from heat stroke and related conditions. And the third is through diseases carried by vectors, which influences the distribution of diseases like Lyme disease and wild African disease, borne by ticks and mosquitoes, which spread pathogens causing illness. A friend of mine who's actually the captain of the UCLA soccer team, like D1 level, recently got Lyme disease, unfortunately, and had to be dropped out of last week of school. So he's coming back next year, which is a shame, but very real consequence. And the final way it would impact our human system is on common human activities, aka our everyday lives. By 2100, the combination of is that over?
1 more minute.
Okay. The high temperature and humidity in some areas is expected to compromise human activities, so we won't be able to do stuff like grow tomatoes and trees outside, or work as yard boys in our summer jobs. Not that I've ever done that recently. The reason we have all these problems is because burning fossil fuels releases carbon dioxide, which is also emitted from human-induced impacts on forestry and other land use. Ultimately, the solution calls for a mandate of substantial and sustained reductions in greenhouse gas emissions to limit climate change risk through two major means. The first, that individuals must adapt their lifestyles, which Ellie will elaborate on further in her brief, and the second is that policymakers must continue to propose and enforce initiatives to reduce emissions, as Obama did by his Clean Power Plan in 2005, my bad. Will the solution work? In a study entitled Effectiveness of U.S. State Policies in Reducing CO2 Emissions from Power Plants, published on Nature in 2014, findings revealed that both types of direct strategy and indirect strategy lower power plants emissions and thus are viable building blocks of a federal climate regime. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me make a couple of quick statements. When you're up there speaking, we have something called the power stance, where your feet are like a tripod, so
Right.
keep them in the power stance position. You were crossing over your legs a lot, and you were swaying a lot, so keep it in everyone remember to stay in the power stance when you're speaking. And if you find yourself, since we have a timer that's giving good time signals, if you find yourself spending too much time on one part of your case, jiggle down so we hear your solvency and your advantages and stuff, so good. Thank you. Chair now will entertain a cross-examination period not to exceed 3 minutes, and you may take some preparation time now if you'd like.
Let me know when you're ready, so.
Okay.
What's the time?
45 seconds.
Okay.
5 seconds on 1 minute.
Yeah.
Can you start 1 minute?
That's okay.
Okay, cross-examination time, please. Stand close together so I can get you both in the picture. Good. Thank you for moving over, Rhonda. Good.
Okay, so you said that climate change has the ability to undermine our food security, correct?
Food security?
That's what you said,
Correct.
food security.
Yes, food security.
I just want to make it clear that that's not actually something that we know. There are a lot of people. Are you aware? Have you heard about positive impacts on our food that CO2 emissions can have?
I've heard of some of them. That
Yeah, because there are people in this world like Leighton Stewart. He's the right now he's the president of a nonprofit organization who's adamantly fighting to stop all of the policy cutting down CO2 because of the valid things that CO2 can do for public health.
Okay. For public health or for food security?
Actually, both. It helps out our food security because we've all learned about photosynthesis in school. I imagine you all have taken a biology class once or twice in your life. Photosynthesis, plants need carbon. Carbon dioxide is what's going to help our plants get bigger. It helps them with growth.
The issue isn't that we don't have carbon dioxide, it's we have way too much of it. I think the plants are probably good with photosynthesis.
Yes, but the thing is what these people are trying to argue is that this carbon dioxide should be seen as a resource with these plants as much as anything else.
Well, considering that carbon dioxide levels are at 400 parts per million right now, I think we have an excess rather than really any limit.
I like that you bring up the 400 parts per million because this same professor, this guy with this master's in geology, he said that as an example, Earth's atmosphere currently contains 338 in CO2, but in Navy subs, the danger level, the Navy doesn't consider CO2 dangerous until you reach 8,000. Right now we're at 300. So, and the other thing is that with photosynthesis, we're not only yielding food, we're yielding oxygen. So, sort of your claims of public health, I appreciate the anecdotal evidence you gave of one person who had a disease at UCLA, but on a population level, there's not as much evidence as you might be pointing out that this is as much as a public health issue because of the air quality. It's not really clear whether or not that's causing big damages because carbon dioxide can also help with that.
But the issue is in the future, whether or not that becomes a reality, and the whole point is to mitigate the threat of that as opposed to waiting for it to become real and then trying to do something about it.
I don't even know that there's proof that there's a threat. But anyway, moving on, you claim that global temperatures are about 0.8 degrees Celsius higher than on average, right? But before the Industrial Revolution, that's what you claim?
I don't think that NASA does.
NASA does? Got it. Well, actually, I mean, we're not really sure that. I appreciate that sort of one claim about now versus then, but really this is the kind of thing that goes in cycles. Professor Don J. Easterbrook claims that we're actually going through a period of cooling right now. That this is sort of like a 30-year natural cycle thing that happens. So like I do appreciate that that's where we were there. This is where we are then. But there's a lot of cycles in between them. So I don't know that you can say that's the most valid thing.
It's a policy debate, not a fact debate. We're not debating whether or not global warming is.
Well, I'm sorry, but there's a lot of fact here. Whether or not reducing carbon, being a good policy for mitigating global warming, rests very much on whether or not carbon is causing global warming. So for you to just say to me, this is a policy debate, we can't worry about the facts, I think is a little bit invalid.
All right, fair enough. I mean, if we're talking about facts, now there's a 97% consensus. Whether or not it's agreed with, there is 100%.
We talked about in the previous debates about how that 97% debate is a pretty arbitrary thing that we're not really sure how it came up with. It had to do with search queries, so I'm not going to be.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
7% there.
Very lively cross-examination.
You want time before?
I'm going like 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Like 7, 6, 5.
Oh, minutes? Yeah.
Okay.
This is 4 minutes.
Chair now recognizes the leader of the opposition. Shh. House, come to order.
Yeah.
Chair now recognizes the leader of the opposition. Could you stand a little bit that way, please? Yes, that's good. For a speech not to exceed, she's in the power stance, excellente. For a speech not to exceed 7 minutes in length.
I am in the firmest negation that reducing carbon emissions is a good policy for mitigating global warming threats. I propose the aforementioned for 2 main reasons. Number 1, there is no applicable carbon emission reducing policy that works. And number 2, other policies would better mitigate global warming threats if in fact these threats do exist. As for my first point today, let me introduce you to the main two public policies ordinarily debated about in this debate. I will also define the policies as my opponent has failed to do so. In the cross-examination, she said, this is not a fact debate, this is a policies debate. So I raised the question, why didn't she bring up any matters about policy? The first main policy is the carbon tax, simply raising the price of goods that include the use or exhaust of carbon emissions. The thinking behind the carbon tax, simply put by economic departments at Reed College, is that we should make bad stuff more expensive, and by doing that, good stuff gets less expensive. But this is problematic thinking, because John Sutter, Emory alumni and advocate for environmental issues, states in a 2016 article that if you raise the price of something that's less expensive, you're not magically making the more expensive option less expensive. Now you have two expensive options, and that's kind of detrimental to the lower income class. Clifton B. Parker from Stanford used data from the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research to find that it is in fact lower income Americans who often drive older, less fuel efficient cars and frequently commute long distances to work to lower cost housing. Simply put, people who are poor use less carbon because they can't afford these newer infrastructures that use less carbon. Let me give you an example from Kenneth P. Green, an environmental scientist from UCLA, who knew that a carbon tax would have limited impact. He stated, in California, we raised gas prices to $4 per gallon, which is outrageous. Did any of you guys stop driving your car? No, because you guys have enough money to not walk 15 miles to the beach, because you guys have money. But lower income classes, it affected them. They're the ones who had to walk to work. The second main public policy is the cap and trade, which my opponent also did not bring up. As of February 2016, the United States Environmental Protection Agency defines a cap and trade program as a maximum limit on emissions. However, each source, like a large corporation, can design its own compliance strategy to meet the overall reduction requirement, including the sale or purchase of allowances. Wow, what does that mean? That means that corporations have a limit of how much carbon they can use. But if your corporation's like super rich, you can buy all the carbon emission use you want. Getting permits on permits and using all the carbon, again, the lower income class is discriminated against. So if an organization is extremely wealthy, they can buy more carbon emission. The Citizens 2015 Global Climate Agreement campaign showed a huge discernment for the easy feasibility of abuse in the cap and trade program, stating that international cap and trade systems usually do not have agreed upon way to manage the mechanism, leaving the system open to fraud and abuse. Furthermore, the cap and trade program also forces small business to make up costs elsewhere because they are paying for more carbon. And the National Association of Manufacturers with the National Federation of Independent Business stated that the House bill is a job killer, and the cap and trade programs cost 2.4 million U.S. jobs. And as a quasi-international model, a cap and trade program was launched in 2005 in Europe, also known as the Emission Trading Scheme. It was such a big failure, and MIT said that instead of carbon costing about 7 to 8 per ton, it came up to 13 euros per ton. And greenhouse gases are like green technologies like solar panels and wind energy that don't work as well cost like 35 euros per gallon. So still they were paying the 13 euros over the 35 euros, and now the lower income classes are also paying more money, which is just detrimental. And we have also had broader international failures of carbon-reducing public policy. Most famously, the Kyoto Protocol, in which developed nations tried to lower their carbon emissions. The Kyoto Protocol also graciously allowed rich countries to offset emissions by investing in low-carbon projects in poorer parts of the world. Chris Warren, Director of Communications Institute for Energy, stated in 2015 that 1.3 billion, not million, billion people will benefit from reliable energy systems. Yet the Kyoto Protocol had developed nations forcing the poorest countries to use the most expensive, fruitless energy sources. According to the World Bank report, if such a strategy continued, there would be over 100 million additional people living in extreme poverty by 2030. And maybe, just maybe, we could forgive all of these detrimental consequences of the Kyoto Protocol if it actually works, but it doesn't work. A study from the post-Kyoto Protocol found that CO2 levels had actually increased in the following countries since they signed the binding documents which they later broke to mandate the issue. And these countries are Canada, Luxembourg, Australia, Austria, New Zealand, Iceland, Spain, Denmark, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Norway, Finland, Japan, Netherlands, Latvia, and Italy. It raised CO2 emissions in all of those countries. So how do we offset climate change if it does or does not exist, since my opponent has not cleared that burden of proof? Well, firstly, climate change is not all bad. In fact, NASA states that it's natural. Roughly 30% of incoming sunlight is reflected back into space, and the 70% that is absorbed by the land and ocean is good. In fact, if there was no natural greenhouse, Earth's average temperature would be 0 degrees Fahrenheit right now, rather than the 59 degrees Fahrenheit that it is today. And I'm from the valley. 59 degrees is still pretty cold. An easy and simple way to mitigate global warming threats is to lower chlorofluorocarbons, which according to the U.S. Congressional hearing is obviously a threat to the ozone layer. And this could be done easily. Unlike reducing carbon emissions, reducing chlorofluorocarbons is simple and effective, and there are policies that work. And it's been done successfully by the United States, Canada, and several Scandinavian countries. More importantly, we need to look at methane. Robert Simon from NASA, who used data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and Earth System Research Laboratory, found that carbon dioxide levels have increased 38% since 2009, but methane levels have increased 148%. And I admit I'm a North Campus major, but I know that 148 is kind of larger than 38. And once again, methane reduction could be easily implemented by eating plant-based foods the way developing countries do. It benefits our economy, benefits our health, and it benefits our planet. For these reasons and many more, I'm in the strongest negation that implementing a policy to reduce carbon emissions is a good plan for mitigating global warming threats. Once again, there is no applicable workable model of the policy used to reduce carbon emissions, and there are other solutions. The focus needs to turn away from carbon-reducing policies, which would be detrimental to developing countries, and implement policies that are simply unsuccessful. Thank you.
Thank you. You're going to go right for cross-examination? No time, no prep time? Okay. One a week, huh? Thank you. Okay, it's all good. Okay, stay in the power stance for the cross-examination. Give me just a moment to write a comment about this. Okay.
So your first argument is that, quote, the applicable carbon emission reducing policies don't work, in which you extensively quoted John Sutter to back up your point. Am I right?
Not extensively, but yes, I believe I have one point from him.
Your quote from John Sutter was that we should make bad stuff more expensive and good stuff less expensive. Is that what you said?
No, that's incorrect. I'm sorry you weren't listening to my speech. That was a quote from Reed College.
It's actually, I looked up the article that you quoted from Sutter.
And if you read the article, it says from Reed College.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. You quoted John Sutter in your speech. Are you aware that John Sutter is one of the biggest supporters of the carbon tax, and the article which you quoted once, actually fully advocates for the carbon tax, calling it a cheap, proven fix to the world's biggest problem and the country's smartest climate change policy? Yes or no?
Did you hear my point from John Sutter that making something more expensive doesn't make the next thing less expensive?
I did, but
I used one quote from him, and that quote is completely logical, and you could have come up with that point on your own without me stating it for you.
Moving forward. Are you aware that the article is actually about a case study of the wildly successful implementation of the carbon tax in British Columbia?
Are we still talking about this one point that I just said could have been logically proven?
Or not? Is that what you read? Did you read about the case study of British Columbia?
So I took a source that's in...
I'm not asking about the source.
I took a source that you agree...
All right, moving on.
Let's move on.
You are discussing the fact that there are other natural causes central to global warming,
yes.
Correct? All right. Are you aware that methane accounts for 9% of total greenhouse gases?
Are you aware that you said you're not even sure whether or not climate change is real?
Okay, all right. Let's just move right past that. Are you aware that the paper behind CFCs as a major contributor to climate change, published in the International Journal of Modern Physics, was conclusively rebutted and rejected by the same journal in which it was originally published because it is, quote, based on fundamentally flawed premises such as, quote, curve fitting, in which variables in a model are arbitrarily stretched to match the observational data? Are you aware of that?
There are countless studies in which show that aerosol sprays sprays cause chlorofluorocarbons.
Okay. Nothing further.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you want a timeout before you speak?
No, I think we're good.
House, come to order, please. Chair will now recognize the member of the government for a speech not to exceed 7 minutes in length. Here.
Alright, just to clarify, carbon dioxide is the primary greenhouse gas emitted through human activities. The United States Environmental Protection Agency stated in 2014 that CO2 accounted for about 80.9% of all U.S. greenhouse gas emissions from human activities. Though carbon dioxide is naturally present in the atmosphere as part of Earth's carbon cycle, human activities are altering the carbon cycle, both by adding more CO2 to the atmosphere than nature can absorb. This consequently influences the ability of natural sinks like forests to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. While CO2 emissions come from a variety of natural sources, human-related emissions are responsible for the increase that has occurred in the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution. Furthermore, climate mitigation is defined as any action taken to permanently eliminate or reduce long-term risk and hazards of climate change to human life and property. According to Longboard and the Skeptical Environmentalist, CO2 makes up 60% of the extra heat-trapping gases and is expected to constitute an even larger part in the future. Man has increased the quantity of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, CO2 in particular, and about 80% of the extra CO2 comes from the combustion of oil, coal, and gas. Since pre-industrial times, atmospheric CO2 concentrations have increased by more than 40%. We're not saying that CO2 is bad in general, we're saying that this excess is bad, and even a small amount of it can be detrimental to our society. If carbon dioxide emissions exceed the environment's ability to remove carbon from the atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide increase. This increased concentration has been linked to changes in global climate change that may alter regional weather patterns and vegetation distribution. May also have significant health effects. Since greenhouse gas concentrations already have increased, adaptation will be required if there is drastic reduction in the current and future emissions. Consider what happens when more CO2 is released from outside of the natural carbon cycle when burning fossil fuels. Although our output is tiny compared to the amount moving through the carbon cycle each year, it adds up because the land and ocean cannot absorb all of the extra CO2. Only about 40% of this additional carbon dioxide is absorbed and the rest remains in the atmosphere. Human carbon dioxide emissions upset the natural balance of the carbon cycle. While fossil fuel-derived carbon dioxide is a very small component of the global carbon cycle, extra CO2 is cumulative because the natural carbon exchange cannot absorb the additional CO2. With man-made carbon dioxide in the atmosphere increasing since the pre-industrial era, there's artificial forcing of global temperatures, which is warming the planet overall. Because the ocean is not absorbing 60% of human-created emissions, this is negatively impacting biodiversity. Oceans which are not able to absorb all the carbon dioxide from burning fossil fuels have negative consequences. In fact, a recent study in 2016 from the World Watch Institute suggests that oceans have absorbed about 10% less of fossil fuel emissions since 2000. Currently, between 2 and 7% of coastal ecosystems are lost each year, due largely to runoff pollution and coastal development. In addition, fishing activities that dredge seafloor often damage seagrass meadows, and aquaculture operations frequently lead to the destruction of mangrove ecosystems. Fossil fuel consumption and demand show no signs of leveling off, let alone decreasing. More consumption means more refineries, power stations, and infrastructure, in addition to the extraction itself. Biodiversity loss is accelerating, and the risks to biodiversity are increasing. We are in the midst of a global biodiversity crisis where the biggest threats to biodiversity are human activities. Even local biodiversity can have a large impact on ecosystem function and productivity. As earlier mentioned, since the ocean cannot absorb all of these emissions, the emissions that go back into the atmosphere cause heat trapping and consequently contribute to global warming. According to the United States Environmental Protection Agency, 68% of carbon emissions in the U.S. come from electricity and transportation. The combustion of fossil fuels generate electricity is the largest single source of CO2 emissions in the nation, accounting for about 37% of total U.S. CO2 emissions and 30% of total U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. On top of this, the combustion of fossil fuels such as gasoline and diesel to transport people and goods is the second largest source of CO2 emissions, accounting for 31% of total U.S. carbon dioxide emissions.
By identifying the main contributing factors to the excess of carbon emissions in the atmosphere, the United States Environmental Protection Agency suggests 3 different solutions to the problem of fossil fuel consumption. First, they suggest to increase energy efficiency. Improving the insulation of buildings, traveling in more fuel-efficient vehicles, and using more efficient electrical appliances are ways to reduce energy consumption and thus CO2 emissions. The second solution they propose is to increase energy conservation. Reducing personal energy use by turning off lights and electronics when not in use reduces electricity demand. Reducing distance traveled in vehicles reduces petroleum consumption, and both are ways to reduce energy carbon dioxide emissions through conservation. The last thing they suggest is fuel switching. Producing more energy from renewable sources and using fuels with lower carbon dioxide content are ways to reduce carbon emissions. While this last solution might require more financial investment, things like turning off light bulbs and carpooling to work do not come at any extra additional cost. They even are more cost effective. But before implementing any policy, we want to know if the solution will work. On average, individual Americans emit 19 tons of carbon dioxide annually while driving their cars and heating their homes. This is more than people in any other country. The Earth Observatory Division of NASA claims that if we can reduce our personal emissions by just 5%, total U.S. emissions will drop by 300 million tons. Our opponent claims that implementing a policy to reduce carbon emissions is not necessary and not cost effective. However, we disagree because multiple sources have explained that every amount of human-produced carbon dioxide that is above the amount that Earth can absorb is trapped in the atmosphere and thus contributes to global warming. Furthermore, we have suggested cost-effective solutions that can help to mitigate the percentage of fossil fuels that humans emit. Therefore, by reducing carbon emissions, this would be a good policy to mitigate global warming.
Thank you. Okay. Well, I guess she's not ready.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so the majority of your speech consisted of information talking about the rise of carbon emissions. So you believe CO2 emissions are rising, right?
Not that they're rising, but they're above the level that the Earth can absorb.
So you don't think carbon emissions are rising?
I think the more that people use fossil fuels, the more detrimental it is to our society.
Okay, so you're not sure if carbon emissions are rising.
Sure.
Now, whether or not carbon emissions are or are not rising, you correlated with them with global warming about once, right? The rest of the
I
time
wouldn't
you're
use the
talking
word
about
correlation.
greenhouse gases, right?
I would not use the word correlation.
Okay, and let's assume, okay, so for now we have an entire speech about the causes of carbon emission, but not a whole lot
That's
of
incorrect
information.
as well.
The bulk of your speech was about the effects of these greenhouse gases, such as poor health or like a bad environment or these things, right? You talked a lot about the effects of global warming, right? And how global warming is bad, if it does or does not exist. Okay, but now we have a lot of talking about the effects of global warming, but not a lot of facts about the policy of whether reducing carbon emissions is a good
As your
policy.
partner said, there are a lot of
global
facts
warming.
involved in a policy debate.
Okay, and okay, let's pretend like the burden of proof has been cleared for your sake. Okay, so let's assume for 1 minute that it is in fact that carbon emissions cause global warming, which my partner will talk about next. Your solution to this issue, which may or may not exist, is through better infrastructure, carpooling, and choosing renewable sources, right?
Yes.
Okay, And let us pretend like you gave us a good way to implement these policies, even though you gave us
Turning
none.
off a light bulb is pretty simple.
Okay, how are you going to force people? If Kyoto Protocol, which was mandating countries, and they had a binding contract to this agency, and they still
The
did
reason we're
not
not
do what they were
advocating for
supposed
this
to
is
do.
because it obviously doesn't work, so we're looking for alternative solutions for this problem.
And you're looking at turning off the light bulb, correct?
I would not say that that's the only thing, but as you said,
Your
different
solutions.
countries
What were
can't
your
afford
What were your
everything.
solutions?
We don't want the
to,
poor people to
What were
suffer,
your
as you mentioned.
solutions to this mandate? What were your solutions? It was carpooling, better infrastructure, and let's see, solar. Solar power was in your brief, but you didn't mention it. So better infrastructure and luxury of carpooling to a popular destination.
as well as switching to more fuel
Okay,
efficient
and switching to
platforms.
fuel efficient light bulbs that cost money,
Not
right?
light bulbs, platforms of fuel efficient energy, which the poor people who apparently are suffering from carbon dioxide cannot afford. So it's not practical to force that upon every single population.
Exactly, it's not practical to force anything upon any population.
So
So
that
you're
would
forcing
apply
people
for
to
your
carpool
claim
to
as well.
popular destinations, even though these people who go to destinations far from their home, they can't carpool because they live so far away from their home. How are they going to carpool there?
I'm not talking about people's ability to carpool. I'm just saying
But your
people who
solution,
can do it
your
should
only
do it to
two
help
solutions
carbon
was
emissions.
carpooling and light bulbs. So I don't know what
as
solution
well
you're
as
presenting
switching
here
to more
today.
fuel efficient platforms.
Fuel efficient platforms, which cost a lot of money.
Exactly.
Okay,
So not everyone can do it.
Thank you very much.
Is it just when I have to start? So. Yeah, go for it. Hello everyone, my name is David Gottlieb. Today I'll be speaking for the opposition, and the one thing that I struggle to understand is why exactly it would be a good idea for our government to go ahead and invest its money, which is really our money, on solving a problem that we are not 100% sure exists. The fact of the matter is there's still a very subjective debate going on about global warming. That's the reason why it's the subject for this class, the debate class at UCLA. And I'm going to get into some research that proves that it's still a very subjective thing. One thing that my opponent did use this 80% number. That 80% number is a ton of fun, but really all that is the percentage of the emissions that we're putting out. But really the fact of the matter is the emissions that we put out are only 5% of the greenhouse effect. 95% of the greenhouse effect is coming from water vapor. So when you're using that piece of data, you're actually trying to make it sound like CO2 has a 284 more times effective rate of affecting our climate than it really does, because really it's 0.117% of the greenhouse effect is due to atmospheric CO2 from people. I know that earlier they wanted us to stress what comes from people. Anyway, I was skeptical when I first read that. Found another source, 2013 report done by the National Center for Policy Analysis, encouraged with the statement. The graphs laid out very clearly CO2 is only 3.62% of the greenhouse effect, and of that little 3.62, only 3.4% is from humans, so if you do the math, you get about maybe a fifth of a percent. Anyway, even factoring in other gases, only the 0.28%, just like Sapan said, the research has been repeated, it's been backed up. Moving on. And so if we are going to assume that we are in a warming period, Bjorn Lamberg's skeptical environment claims that there is a correlation between solar activity and temperature, and that probably solar brightness has increased 0.4% over the past 200 to 300 years, which is causing an increase of 0.4 degrees Celsius. So in this big world of all these different factors going on, it's very hard to say what exactly is causing this shift. And now for the other side of the issue, that the idea that we might not even be in a warming period, that we're in a cooling period. Again, this is very subjective. There are a lot of statements on each side. Professor Don J. Easterbrook is stymied that, quote, despite no global warming in 10 years and recording record-setting cold in 2007 and 2008, the IPCC and computer modelers who believe that CO2 is the cause of global warming are still predicting that the Earth is in store for a catastrophic warming this century. He goes on to conclude that global warming, which is the global warming since 1977, is over. Minute increase in anthropogenic CO2, there's the word you're looking for, which is he has his even lower percent that I listed earlier, was not the cause of the warming. It's a continuous cycle that lasts for 500 years. Additionally, 2015 NASA study said there's actually an increase in Arctic snow, which points to the cooling going on. The Arctic snow that accumulated 10,000 years ago is currently adding enough ice to the continent to outweigh the losses from thinning glaciers, which is great news for the animated polar bear in Inconvenient Truth. Back to the topic of CO2, a lot of people aren't entirely convinced that CO2 in the atmosphere is a bad thing. I talked a lot about this earlier, just sort of because photosynthesis is a thing. It needs CO2 to happen. There are people saying that we'll actually get more oxygen if we put in CO2. There are people who are saying that the fruits and vegetables have a lot to benefit. But anyway, that's a lot of factual stuff. I'm going to move a little bit on to policy, and to be honest, I'm very surprised that at no point during the government's point they brought up cap and trade, a cap and trade system or a carbon tax system, because those are the two. If you type in carbon policy, those are the two that are going to come up. So I'm a little bit shocked that my opposition didn't even come up with those. But maybe just in case they're saving it for the end, I'll go over why they're bad. In the Congressional Budget Office 2013 report of effects on carbon tax and the economy and environment, I quote, the burden of a carbon tax, that is, the hardship caused by the price increase for fossil fuels, emission-intensive goods and services, by the reduction in wages and reduction of the investment, would fall disproportionately on several groups: low-income households, workers and investors in emission-invested industries, and people in regions of the country that rely on emissions-intensive industries. So that sort of goes back to the debate, why is it for the government to decide which specific groups are going to be unfairly impacted by their policies? There are also a lot more global economic side effects to unilateral carbon policy. Here's a quote in a 2013 journal by the American Economics Review. Quote, policymakers fear that unilateral carbon policy will reduce competitiveness, increase imports, lead to higher carbon emissions elsewhere, which is called carbon leakage. Cap and trade policies are much better. Rana went over how they failed in Europe. I have information that says the exact same thing. It has not been going well in Europe, and also with journals that have thought about how it affects small business here, like in the Houston Chronicle, they claimed that there would be a loss of competitive advantages, there would be trade deficits, there would be job losses. So in general, it just wouldn't be a good idea for the U.S., just like it wasn't a good idea for Europe. Last bit of research I'll bring up regarding CO2 is just something that we all know. Correlation, causation, not the same thing. Even if evidence of CO2 is correlating with the temperature, even if the evidence that claims that CO2 correlates with temperature is accurate, that doesn't really mean a whole lot. The Great Global Warming Swindle talks about carbon lag. I got a really mathematical article that backs that up as lately as 2014. The quote is, first, correlation alone proves only correlation, not cause and effect. Physics is required to describe and prove cause and effect. I haven't heard any physics from the opposition yet. But that's about it for my research. Really, I think that what I want to get out here is that, I would like to remind you all that at the beginning of class, 93% of you were not on our side. You were given this exact question, and you went with, I think 93% of you said that you agreed with the policy, and that the rest of you were uncertain. However, one thing that I would like to do is to remind you guys that you were all handed that sheet of paper right after you watched An Inconvenient Truth. Which is one of the most persuasive pieces of media really on the planet right now, really in the last several decades. This is the second class in a row in which I had to watch Inconvenient Truth. The first one was COM 140, which is an upper division class taught by Dr. Michael Suman about persuasive communication. I taught that I didn't teach it. I took that class last quarter. In that class we had to analyze all the reasons that made it so persuasive. Gore's ability to tap into narrative transportation theory, his credibility, his charisma, his fear appeals, his emotional appeals, and just with any subjective debate, and even the opposition has agreed with me, this is a subjective debate. They're not sure that global warming exists. There are going to be people on either sides trying to get you to come to your side, when what I'm asking you to do is to sort of disregard the persuasive techniques that you've been subject to, and really just take a look at this and think, who are we to enact this policy, spend this money, spend this time on something that we are not actually sure is a problem. Thank you very much. I stand for cross-examination.
Is that 7 minutes?
6.5.
6.5.
Okay, got it, 3 minutes.
You take your time now. Okay, good. Very good. Oh, can you move that way? This way, yeah. This way a little bit more. Can you get rid of that Avion bottle? Sorry, Sarah
Sponsor.
Silverman. Well, yeah, Sarah Silverman. No, no, she drinks Fuji water. Okay.
Alright, so I'm going to be beginning cross-examination, and all these are yes or no questions, so feel free to answer yes or no. Okay, so you use a statistic that 0.117% of the greenhouse effect is due to atmospheric carbon dioxide from human activity, correct?
That is the statistic that I use, yes.
And you said that this is almost 300% or 300 times more than.
Well, you claimed that 80%. You used the 80% number, and the 80%
Okay.
number, like I said, is a lot of fun
So you got this.
because you can use
a
it.
statistic, correct? So you got this source from geocraft.com, and are you aware
No,
that
I
this
didn't. I have two different sources for it. As I
Then I guess the
said.
brief you turned in was incorrect.
No, I just have two.
cited.
I just have two different sources for the brief.
Okay.
If
Are
you
you
look at
aware
my
that the
brief.
source was last updated in January 2011?
That's why.
you're not
That's why
supposed to
I
claim
told
that
you. I
used
told
this
you guys I was skeptical when I read it. That's why I went ahead and got the 2013 source that had the exact same information. So you can't say that the I said that in my speech. I don't know if you missed it or whatever, but like I said, I was as skeptical as you were going to be. So I went ahead and I rechecked the data, and I found a very credible source, which is also in my brief. So
Probably good that you didn't use that source.
I did use the
So you
source in my
talked
brief.
about
Do you want to
carbon
look at it?
tax. Are you aware that the article about a case study of a wildly successful implementation of carbon tax in British Columbia, which implemented their carbon tax in 2008, between 2008 and 2013, carbon emissions in British Columbia dropped 15% and fuel use dropped about 16%.
Which article were you talking about? Which article were you talking about?
This is the one where the British Columbia said that carbon emissions were dropping 15% and fuel use dropped 16%.
Look, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what to say. There's a lot of things wrong with the carbon tax. I thought I went into them a lot about how they were gonna hurt. I mean, I can go through them again if you'd like. There were a lot of things that were wrong with the carbon tax.
Okay. That's fine.
I don't know about I don't know what the small sample size thing you're talking about in British Columbia.
Okay, would you also agree that the human carbon dioxide levels have risen 35% since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution?
Yeah, but what you don't understand is that such a small percentage of the anthropomorphic carbon is such a small percentage of the actual larger greenhouse
every
effect.
percent that the Earth cannot absorb contributes negatively to our society. So even those
Even though really, you're going to
0.2%.
argue that really small. The whole point
Yes,
is
I
that
am,
the
because
greenhouse
you even
effect
said
is
that small percent from water vapor is about 400 times as much. So it actually is really.
No. What you're claiming, you're trying to make it sound like
Persuade me.
You're trying to make it sound like it's 400 times what it is.
You
The
said
fact of the matter, you're
those
saying
exact
80%.
numbers.
I'm saying 0.11% because your 80% is that carbon is the amount.
Those are the total amount of.
That's the total amount of emissions. You're saying that
And
carbon is
the Earth
80%
can
of the total
absorb
emissions.
60%.
80% of the total emissions is in fact a very, very small percent of the actual greenhouse effect. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
I think I'm being very clear.
Okay. Still, anything that is above what the Earth can absorb is harmful.
And who are you to
our
claim what
society.
the Earth can absorb?
Based on the United States Environmental
Well-
Protection Agency, which I think is a more credible source.
I'm sorry, but
January
we've been doing just fine with the 95% of greenhouse gases that we already have. I don't understand how this tiny little bit of carbon is going to make that big of a difference.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was deeply upsetting.
I don't need any prep time.
Okay, go on.
Well, good. Does that mean she doesn't have any, or do you have any left, or
She has 2 minutes left.
Raina, Rana? You have 2 left if you want to use it. If you want to collect your thoughts.
Everyone want a break? I think everyone might want a break after that. So we'll take
Clap. House come to order, please. Debaters are strategizing. You all have the same food,
Professor, we came prepared.
huh? Came from where?
We came prepared.
Came prepared. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Is everybody like happy now? Okay. And then Julia, can you give me 5, 4, 3, 2, 1? Thanks. Listen, I love the environment. I eat lentils, I go on nature walks through Runyon Canyon, but this debate is not about who loves the environment more. This is a debate of policy. My opponents spent the majority of their time telling you about the effects of climate change, which may or may not exist. However, they did not spend any time supporting an applicable carbon-reducing policy, which is why we are here today. I find it outrageous that in a debate of policy, they have offered you no policy. Instead, I have had to stand up here and define the 2 main types of policy policy ordinarily talked about in this debate: carbon tax and cap and trade. Which I remind you now that carbon tax, according to the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research, is detrimental to lower income Americans, and cap and trade is set up for fraud, abuse, and employment loss. My opponents talked about neither of these two main rudimentary ideas. They only speak about broad solutions such as carpooling, better infrastructure, and solar panels, but never as a policy, only as a fact probability. And even so, the aforementioned is blatantly discriminatory against lower income families. Moreover, they provide no examples of such policy workings, they have no plan on how to mandate such policies, and they have no proof that such policies would in fact lower carbon emissions. The sad truth of this debate is that as an audience, you have not heard one good example of a carbon-reducing policy to mitigate global warming threats. And that wasn't by no accident. The government knows that these policies don't work. In my cross-examination, she stood up here and she said, I know those policies don't work, so let's change a light bulb, because policies don't work. And instead of using examples and peer-reviewed research on the benefits of carbon-reduced implemented public policy, they have thrown at you random imaginary anecdotes, such as their love for sunflower seeds and her friend dropping out of school for Lyme disease. If you were able to stay awake throughout the entire debate, you would have noticed that the bulk of the government's speech is about the effects of global warming rather than reducing carbon emissions, be it a good policy for mitigated global warming threats. Let me reiterate, they couldn't even give you one example. I have stood here before you today and I've given you a list of over 20 countries in which public policy to reduce carbon emission has failed, be it through the Kyoto Protocol, the European Emission Trading Scheme, or the plethora of peer-reviewed research articles I have provided. I have shown again and again that past public policies aimed to reduce carbon dioxide have not worked. They have not only failed, they have failed miserably. They have dealt developing countries further into poverty, developed countries to experience economic turmoil, and has even caused an increase in carbon emissions. The government has not addressed any of their burdens. They have not provided you with a policy. They have not provided you with a mandate. They haven't even successfully shown a strong causation between carbon emissions and global warming. But for argument's sake, let me pretend that through the power of love, I give them the perfect carbon-reducing policy. And I'm going to give it to them with fairy and pixie dust, so they're able to mandate this policy. Even then, the public policy would not work, because the Environmental Protection Agency, which they love so much, has stated that a 60% reduction in CO2 emissions by 2050 would cause the global temperature to be reduced only by 0.1 degrees Celsius, which is nothing. That effect is so incredibly statistically minute and forecasted into the future that it is not logical to spend billions of usually low-income taxpayer dollars, because there's always loopholes for the rich, to implement my perfect imaginary policy of love and pixie dust. In fact, the Prime Minister of this debate would agree, as she quoted Lomberg stating global warming size. The Prime Minister quoted Lomberg saying that global warming exists, but she cut the beginning and the end of this sentence. And the middle of the sentence says that the size and future projections are unrealistically pessimistic. She also stated herself that she doesn't even know whether climate change exists or not. So why are we going into this propaganda around the foundation of the issue we are debating today? Mohammed El-Ashray, the senior fellow with the UN Foundation, stated that people are worried about diverting attention away from carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is the hot button issue. Everybody's talking about carbon dioxide, but that really shouldn't be the case at all. The general public's grossly interest with carbon emissions is hugely problematic because it blockades us, both financially and physically, from what we all truly want. Just to recap, today we saw little from the government side in offering us any evidence that reducing carbon emissions would be a good policy to mitigate global warming threats. They provided us with no examples, they provided us with no policy, they provided us with no mandate. And I'm asking you today to side with Canada, Luxembourg, Australia, Austria, New Zealand, Iceland, Spain, Denmark, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Norway, Finland, Japan, Netherlands, Slovenia, Italy, and the opposition, in acknowledging that reducing carbon emissions is absolutely not a good policy for mitigating global warming threats. Thank you.
Thank you. What? I know they did, but
That's on the debate format.
I thought you were supposed to do world schools. It's offline.
but it's
It
yeah.
was
But
on the debate format.
I know it is, but we
Sorry,
go on.
I got too excited.
We're supposed to just go in the same order.
We're supposed to go back and forth.
Back and forth, back and
Technically,
forth.
this is
Yeah.
better, 'cause it's the burden
Because they have the burden of proof. Like in a courtroom, the prosecution gets to speak first and last because they have the burden of proof and they think it's harder. So we switch, but it seems weird because this takes away an opportunity for refutation. So that's the problem. That's why we switch back and
I think
forth.
it's better if you plan because you can strategically use the op block better.
Okay, let's rock and roll, please.
Right. So the opposition bases their argument on two major claims. The first is that policies reducing carbon emissions, like carbon taxes, do not work. In their brief, they stated that, quote, there is no way to create a successful applicable policy, and any ill-fated policy we do implement would be detrimental to the global economy. We, the proposition, along with the entire population of British Columbia, disagree, and we are proving the statement to be not only based on fallacious logic, but completely false. I'm not a physician, or a physicist, or an economic person, like David so graciously pointed out, but I can read. And there was a study detailing the successful implementation of the carbon tax in British Columbia in 2008, which negates the entirety of their argument. Not only did the province's fossil fuel use fall drastically, but the government's use of revenue resulting from that carbon tax reduced income taxes for all the residents of British Columbia, and its economy grew faster than that of the rest of the country, so that kind of destroys the issue of quote-unquote detrimental effects to the economy. So there is a way, in fact, to create a successful applicable policy. And my opposition's point that poor people take a huge hit the poor people take a huge hit because of the carbon tax doesn't make any sense, because people who were not, like, to ensure that people were not hit with high energy bills, the government cut $100 checks to all the residents in 2008, meaning that climate action dividends eliminated not only carbon pollution, but tax non-neutrality. So, sorry. The point is, it's not bad for the economy. The failure of the Kyoto Protocol, which, by the way, is not the same thing as a carbon tax, does not constitute grounds to completely reject a course of action backed by scientists, lawmakers, businessmen, and the public alike. In the U.S., there is already public support for a carbon tax. And a 2014 survey by the University of Michigan, where Ron is going next year, congratulations, shows that the majority of the American public would support a carbon tax if the revenues were returned back to the public in the form of checks. And support for the tax actually went up if the tax collections instead funded renewable energy projects. So it's not just the public who support the proposal of a carbon tax. Key players in the oil business do too. The top execs of 6 large European oil and gas companies, including BP and Royal Dutch Shell, are calling for a tax on carbon emissions today as an efficient and predictable
Hold your
policy
paper
to
down
limit
low so we can see your face on camera. Thank
greenhouse
you.
gas emissions. The second argument put forth by the opposition is that the
Power
other causes
stance.
are central to global warming. Now, let me be perfectly clear. We agree with the opposition. There are other causes of global warming. Methane, CFCs, that's all legit, that's all valid, okay. But our proposition is not that carbon emissions are the only cause of the only cause of global warming. They're the principal, the major, the main cause of global warming, which is why reducing them is a good, not the only, but a good policy to reduce the threat of global warming. While there are many other natural factors like CFCs, methane, and water vapor, despite the fact that much of the evidence provided by the opposition lacks credibility, to be completely honest, the opposition has been unable to deny the fact that the carbon emissions resulting from human activity are the dominant cause of global warming. That was not said once during their brief. Therefore, I ask you to consider how the notion that we are debating today is not whether reducing carbon emissions is the only policy, which is what the opposition seems to believe, but to focus on the fact that the notion we are debating is whether or not reducing carbon emissions is a good policy for mitigating global warming threats. Professor Miller himself said at the start of this debate that it's better than doing nothing. Like, that was the whole point of the debate, to decide whether or not the policy is better than the alternative, which is doing absolutely nothing. I don't know about you guys, but I'm not willing to find out whether global warming is real by having to wear a mask around all day, like many of my friends in Malaysia did, even though that touch of pathos did not seem to impress the opposition whatsoever. The best policies are proactive, and therefore we must take immediate action to implement policies targeting the reduction of these man-made carbon emissions in order to mitigate the threat of global warming, not only to save ourselves, but our world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The chair now invites the debaters to cross the house and shake hands in a sportsmanlike manner and thank each other for a great debate. And it's now time for the judges to do their job. to make a decision, to sign your ballot, to give your points out in relation to no more than 80, no less than 70.
I didn't mean to make fun of your brother.
It's okay, he's fine now. He's totally fine now.
Okay. It shakes sometimes.
That's not a problem.
Good handwriting. Thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you. Set it there next to your lunch.
I'm glad you guys were able to do that. Got to go to grade school. Are you in 72?
Is that think so?
Yeah.
It's like kind of sitting.
Okay, if I come in 30 minutes late next class, I have my graduation senior portrait to take.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, I guess so. Just be subtle.
I'm going to try to get into that.
Your graduation portrait.
Yeah, all of that was 3 hours. Just one review.
Yeah, that'll be ours.
May I have your cross-examination?
I already gave you.
It says like it's like before.
Yeah. Collect those now. Yeah.
Oh, right now.
Yeah.
That I your it says that I class speech, and then in the email she said we're supposed to do it right after. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm honestly not.
I joked on
I
that.
don't know.
I didn't, the only joke I put in there was that before.
Yeah, methane.
Yeah, methane.
Oh, yeah.
It's Kyoto. It's Kyoto.
It's me.
Kyoto. Kyoto.
Wait, are you Oh, okay.
I accidentally rubbed off since I moved here, but.
Okay, yeah.
No, I heard it when I heard it.
Now that I listen for it, I can hear it.
Something like really
I thought you were Australian.
It was good, but yeah, I'm done for the week. Yeah. Thank you.
So when I came back,
Yeah, what? Yeah, that's fine. What now? 2 weeks, what? Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, it's got everyone has 2 weeks from your debate to do something else. Unless you're 9th and 10th, in which case you need to
Try to watch yourself 3 times and say how you could improve and what you could do better. Do I have all the ballots? Do I have all the ballots?
there's some ballots over here.
Okay, thank you.
So watch the video and he makes critiques on it.
At the end of the video?
Yeah. Oh, he generally gives critiques on it, which is really bad.
Okay.
What's your size?
Oh, Austin, did you put this in back one?
Yeah. I'll go. I don't. No, I'll probably end up doing it.
Down.
I'll probably end up doing it. Yeah, I just don't know how long. She's trying to super
So we yield their time.
We're gonna pay you if you don't. Oh. You don't have to.
Because we're all right now.
Last June.
Huh? Yeah, some people. Forget about it.
My mom and my sister.
Yes, you couldn't figure out by, okay. Someone didn't put their name on their journal entry. Okay. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, on the question of reducing carbon emissions is a good policy for mitigating global warming on a 6-16 decision. The decision goes to the opposition. And we will hear, okay, let's give them a round of applause again. I want to just make a couple of general comments for the future policy people, but for everybody in general, really. And that is, when you're doing a policy proposition, it's important that you focus, obviously, on the specific policy that you'll be proposing and be very clear about it. And that should be the focus, and the most time you spend in your presentation will be on what you're proposing, one, and two, that it's going to work. And I'm afraid, unfortunately, in this debate, we had a focus elsewhere, which became problematic. Okay? Secondly, I still want to remind you of the importance of reading orally the dates of where your sources came from, so the audience can consider where you got your information and what date it was found. That is very helpful. Let us also, 3, remember that we value our opponent, and in cross-ex, let's remember to learn to disagree without being disagreeable, and to try to keep it, civil and kind and tone-like, of that kind of tone, if possible. On the refutation, I will again repeat, and again we had this out of order, which undercut the refutation a little bit, but repeat the idea of, he said we should screw in light bulb, we should change our light bulbs. I disagree, because there's no evidence that changing light bulbs will save us any money. Therefore, this is not a viable policy to prevent global warming. Right? So let's see those 4 steps. Remember? He said, I disagree because, therefore. So I'm looking for those steps in refutation. With that having been said, let's start on the left side today.
Me?
With our glorious timer.
Thank you.
Thank you for timing. Let's hear it for the timer.
I'll have to say everybody spoke very well. Ellie, I actually really liked her speech. She was a little bit soft-spoken at times, but her wording was very clear. The logic was very thorough, and I really appreciated the way she structured it. Everybody else did a great. I liked the pathos invoked, and I liked Rana's refutation was really good, and then David was very spirited with his. But I will have to say it was a really close vote. I did end up voting for the opposition, but it was very. I thought the speech was of a higher quality in the proposition, but the opposition really came in strong with the fact that this is a policy debate. We need to talk more about the policy, and they really focused on the policies that didn't work, which was in their favor. Well, one thing that I think hurt the opposition was that they were very overly strong in the cross-examination to the point of being disagreeable, like
Yes.
the professor mentioned. And
Right.
I mean, given my treatment of Jimmy, I'm the last person to talk about being civil, but even I thought that was a little bit hard.
Right. And what happens, and I've seen this happen in courtrooms too, folks, is you don't want to become the issue. Let the issues remain the issues. You're just the person that's bringing the message. So don't make the messenger so dominant. Good point. Thank you for that. Yes, please.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm Caitlin.
Hi,
I feel like I'm
Caitlin.
very close here. I felt like both sides did a great job. Me not being very familiar with a lot of these topics, I think delivery is very important to me. So I voted for the proposition side because I felt the way they communicated the information was easier for me to like understand and to like tag along with.
Right.
And but you guys did a great job as well. I liked what you said about you don't want to become the issue, and I feel that being very spirited is enthusiasm is great, but we're classmates, and I think a debate, like, it's fun to act that way, but it kind of, in a way, deters the audience from the information you are trying to provide to us.
That's honest. That's honest feedback.
But you guys did a great job.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
My comments are basically
Your
very...
name first.
My name is Yasmin.
Hi, Yasmin.
Hi. My comments are basically very similar to Caitlin's. You guys both did such an amazing job with giving us the information, and Ellie, like Julia said, I loved your speech. It was so easy to follow along with, and you were soft-spoken, but I kind of liked that. Like, I actually understood what you were saying, so I really appreciate that. At the end of the day, I did vote for you guys just because you guys had all this stuff, but what Caitlin said, the delivery is so important, and the fact that you guys were so passionate is so nice, but you're so passionate that the entire time I was disregarding everything you were saying, and I was like, oh my gosh, like it's turning into a fight. I was like, we're just in a class, you know? And this is the only experience I have with debates. I've never watched a debate before. I've never actually, you know, so the first debate that we had in this class was the first debate I've ever seen. So I don't know if this is natural that you're supposed to be very, you know, headstrong, but like I said, I think that the passion was a little
off-putting.
Yeah, it just made me completely forget what you're saying and just completely focus on, you know, how you were delivering it.
I know that these two appreciate getting this honest feedback because they need to know that for law school and legal things and other places. It's metaphorical. Wherever they're going to be communicating, and you know that excessive aggressiveness and that.
Yeah, it kind of
Gotcha.
It kind of makes the audience not want to it's like, well, like why are you?
I'll get you, buddy.
Yeah, exactly.
I got
it's
the
like, I don't want
vote
to vote for that.
Exactly.
My mom always told me that when I was little. I used to yell a lot, and she was always like, even if you're not the person at fault, you're gonna turn into the person at fault when you're the one who yells and screams all the time.
Right. There's another truism we say in the world of argumentation is you can tell when a person starts to lose an argument is his voice or her voice goes up. Yes, please.
Hi everyone, I'm Susanna.
Hi, Susanna.
I have to agree with my roommates, Caitlin and Yasmin.
No bias. No bias.
Hey, I said this was individual voting. Come on.
I feel like they stole all my ideas, but anyway. I'm gonna have to side with the proposition, and the reason why is because I was actually able to understand the verbiage that they were using. And you guys, obviously both of you guys did a really great job, and I could see that there's a lot of research that both sides have done, and they were very prepared, but I feel like there was just so much hostility in the room that I was like, whoa, this is just a debate, guys. Like, chill out, kind of. Like, you guys did great, but still, I was just like, this is a little bit hostile, and I hope we don't do that together because we're debating against each other.
I'd cry. I would literally cry.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, guys,
Yeah.
I had so much more to say. Ellie, you did a great job by like very calm. You
House
didn't
come to
take
order,
this-
please.
You didn't
Someone's
take
talking.
it personally at all, which I appreciate, because the whole point of debate, I think, is to get your point across, to make your audience understand. And one important thing, in my opinion, is listening to your opponent and what they're saying for you to be able to oppose or agree. And it's okay for you to say, hey, I agree with you, but instead of, yeah, well, okay, shut up, like kind of thing, like, I don't think it's necessary to do, because then, like Yasmin mentioned, it takes away the whole the audience understanding the points that they're making and just focusing on the drama.
The drama. Thank you so
You
much.
guys did great. Absolutely fantastic.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for educating us.
Hi, I'm Austin.
Hi, Austin. Great name.
I ended up voting for the opposition.
Suzanne.
I don't think I was necessarily persuaded by the opposition as much as I don't think that you guys met the burden of proof. Overall, I think that there was good arguments on both sides, and I wrote down in my notes, holy shit, at some point. Kind of getting emotional, but overall, I think it was good. The only comment I have about the content is, I think I've noticed it in other debates too, is that there's a conflation between carbon emissions and pollution, which I think happened at some point, which, I don't know, that was just kind of off-putting to me. Other than that, I think it was a good debate.
Thank you, Austin.
Thank you, Austin. Austin mentions the burden of proof, folks, and if that's a foreign concept to you, we say that the affirmative has the burden of proof to prove that, as the narrative goes, there's a problem, it's a big problem, and I have a solution, and that it will work, right? So, those are all those four things will work, and it will be advantageous. And so if they didn't meet that burden of proof, presenting you with a plan that would work, any one of those is enough to say they didn't meet their burden of proof. I have a reasonable doubt, therefore I'm going with presumption and voting negative. One other comment I would make that puzzled me in the debate was the reading of the definitions, which we said we weren't going to do because we're agreeing on them. So make note, don't read your definitions, we're agreeing on them. Okay, you can save time that way. And then later on in the debate, we read even more definitions, which puzzled me even more because nothing was said about them. So let's be thinking about that and keep the definitions out of it. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Casey.
Okay, Casey.
I voted for the opposition today. The reason being, as Austin mentioned, I don't think the proposition met the burden of proof in the debate. I will say, though, that I really appreciate Ellie's debate because, and surprisingly so for me, because I would normally expect a quieter speaker in that context to kind of fade away. But in this case, because it was kind of so extreme, you kind of really stood out in the debate as like a calm and collected person, and it gave you guys a lot more authority, and then also kind of, you know, it was easier to trust you because you seem so level-headed.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay.
I will also say that I felt like Rana's final speech really tied it together the best for me so far out of all the finishing arguments. I thought it was like really well put, really well planned. I was very impressed by it.
Good. Let me say one thing about Rana's speech, which is that when Rana discovered that the affirmative had chosen not to present the basic policy that most people would present for carbon emissions policy, tax and trade and that sort of thing, she decided that in case it was going to come later in the speech or whatever, she was going to refute those dominant ones anyway, as if they had presented it as kind of a preemption. And I thought it showed her to be well researched, and it was a very good strategy that she knew that these were the dominant ones that we probably, cap and trade and so were the ones that we probably should have been debating. Yes, sir.
So I'm Sapan.
Hi, Sapan.
I voted for you guys, the opposition, because you brought up that other countries have tried this policy and it didn't work.
Yeah.
You guys brought up British Columbia, but what you didn't say is whether it actually lowered temperatures, which you said it reduced carbon emissions, but the other half you didn't talk about.
Yeah.
Ellie, during your brief, you did a good job of showing how CO2 disrupts the natural systems. I thought if you guys focused solely on that, you could have won this debate, but you sort of just said it and then forgot about it. Bianca, you did a good job in the cross-sex, bringing up how the author they used in their evidence was actually on your side. But during your brief, the problem I had is what you only talked about how global warming was a problem. You didn't talk about, I didn't
I ran out of time.
That's
like
what I thought.
way.
Yeah, you didn't go into
That's
how.
what happened.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
And then Rana, you had great inflection and speech variation. At points, I thought other points you spoke really fast, and I sort of zoned out. And during your rebuttal, problem I had is you misrepresented their side. I disagreed with their side, but I thought you were unfair in the way you misrepresented it. Mm-hmm. David, you took over in the cross-sex. I thought it was really good, but you did most of the talking, and I thought it was kind of unfair. You didn't let them respond. It seemed a little overbearing. But yeah.
During when I was asking the questions, or during when I was being
You were asking the questions.
Okay.
I thought you did most of the
Okay.
talking.
Those are fair comments. One thing I want to comment on is when you are presenting what the other side says, you have an ethical duty to briefly yet fairly state what they argue. And if you're blatantly saying something different than they argue, the judge has to be really stupid not to notice that. Now, Rana can debate and argue with where you felt she was blatantly misrepresented. I didn't think she was doing it excessively, but I know what you mean. Okay. And it's something we have to be on guard about. They said, we have to really agree, they really did say that we're refuting what they actually said. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Jimmy.
Hi,
That's
Jimmy.
kind of like what the vote kind of showed, but I thought it was pretty close. So for me, the proposition had a burden of proof, and even for like me to show what's a good debate here, since it's a policy debate, it goes beyond what the facts represent. So what I expected out of the policy debate is that what constitutes a good policy. So for me, what constitutes a good policy is how is it implemented, what is implemented, and what are the effects and implications of such implementation. And I don't think the affirmative really addressed a steady, good strategy towards that. So in the end, all we hear is like almost like a facts debate about like, does carbon dioxide increase global warming, when they should be arguing about a steady, fast plan there and just instituting with examples from other sources. So for me, that the affirmative really win me over on that, but they did win me in the cross-examination because I feel like the opposition was really overwhelming in a sense. Like David, I remember specifically, he brought up a point that you're not supposed to do in debate during cross-examination, and that's to bring you evidence that the affirmative, the other side haven't heard about it yet. You can't just be like saying, do you know according to this source that they said this, they said that. That's against the rules of debate, if I remember, when I was writing my cross-examination. That's one of the rules that said you shouldn't be doing. So that's something I really noted, and both of you guys went really aggressive, and that's something I did as well. So it's kind of hypocritical for me to say, but definitely like easy for me to note it because I did it too.
So when you see someone else doing it, it really stands out, doesn't
exactly,
it? Yeah.
Exactly. So it's good thing to be like aggressive, but another thing to be overwhelming. And I think having a good partner that like, for me personally, like Aaron was he was much more like I guess lean back. I have something that's like a synergy, like one's laid back, one's kind of aggressive, and I think that's really good. You can't just have two people firing off all cylinders and attacking everyone.
Right.
So that's for me. I thought Bianca they did a really calm and collective job of like cross-examination, asking the right questions, attacking weaker points, and just like not like screaming at each other's head off. Because for me, like you said, raising your voice is not, you're not winning the debate when you're raising your voices. Because there's a point where like both people just like kind of screaming matches. You know, no one's gonna win this case. It's not a debate.
And you're just alienating the
Yeah,
audience.
exactly. So in the cross-examination phases, I felt like the affirmative really won me over. But all in all, because this was like a policy debate, I think the opposition won me over because they did attack the weakness is that they didn't really even address a good solution towards what constitutes good policy, and that's why they won from me.
Good.
Thank you.
One comment I would make for all of you to think about was that they told you, as judges, they wanted you to do cost-benefit analysis. They asked you to weigh the disadvantages at the end of the round against the advantages from the policy. And if the disadvantages were more, don't do it. Now, I'm not saying that this side, they had disadvantages, the cost to the poor, but they didn't articulate it and weigh it and present it that way. But I want us to be doing that and using our criterion to weigh the different arguments. So we have a weighing mechanism, and you see how it would have worked in this round. Yes, sir.
How you guys doing? I'm Zach.
Hi, Zach.
For me, this one was actually really close, but I ended up siding with the opposition. I thought you guys did a great job in cross-ex, like everyone else was saying. I think you guys really flustered them, and they got kind of like really defensive. But no, it was great for you guys because it really showed, and you guys stayed calm. You guys didn't like get flustered back. But what won it for me was actually David's brief. It was very clear, very concise, very persuasive. He simplified everything, and it made it very easy to understand for me, at least.
Good. Kayla, I'm going to shift to the back row since I got cheated last time. Let's hear from this young lady way over there in the corner in the back row. And then we'll just go along the back row. Yeah. Stand up for Jesus.
Are you talking to me? I don't know.
I am Yang, so I voted for the...
What is your name?
Yang. So I voted for the opposition team. Basically, it's because when I hear the proposition team, it felt like a fact debate, and they were talking about how global warming leads to like bad consequences, and we should avoid that stuff like that. But they didn't say like what policy should the government be like doing, so we can really avoid that. So that puzzled me, and also what puzzled me was the cross-examinations, because I tried to take notes, but I couldn't write down anything, because I don't think any questions was really answered. So yeah, that's one.
Quickly, yes?
By 1 point.
Could you move, please?
The opposition.
Yeah, thank you.
What's your name? Hello, I'm Olivia.
Hi, Olivia.
So I voted for the opposition. It was a really close call. I actually voted, I put, like when I was ranking, I put L as the highest because I felt like
Yeah, that's called a low point win.
Yeah, well, and I also thought, like, considering I was trying to put myself in her position, and if I was, like, I get really flustered and scared when people yell at me, and, like, I'm not saying that that's bad debate, maybe that's great debate, I don't really know, I'm not in any other debate classes, but I just felt like she did a really good job staying composed and not, like, I would have totally raised my voice and been, like, just screaming back, so, like, I don't know, I thought that was really good, and I also felt like your speech was really clear, but what won it was Rana's refutation, I thought was the best reputation I've actually seen so far in this class, so that was really what won it for me. I thought that it was like clear, it was exactly the amount of time, like so she wasn't going over, she wasn't like rushing, I felt like it was really impactful. So.
Yeah. Next person, what I liked about Rana's refutation was I thought that it was actually sort of crystallizing what actually happened in the round, and
look at that, it's 3:45. Just kidding. I got you.
Okay,
Can we go this way?
yeah, right there.
I'm Kai.
Hi, Kai.
I sided with the opposition because they not only like demonstrated the greater cost of existing policy for solving environmental stuff, but also David really made it like poignant how small the role we have in contributing to the total greenhouse effect. That being said, like I really enjoyed both sides of the debate. Ellie, you were very, very awesome. I liked it. You were very anchored throughout the whole debate, which was like a good contrast with everyone else. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you didn't lose your center. Yes, please.
Sweet. So, I actually sided with
Name?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. My name's Wyatt.
Hi, Wyatt.
So I sided with the proposition because
Can you move your head, please? Thank you.
because y'all were effective, y'all were civil, and you made logical arguments. I could really relate to everything that you were saying. But I felt that the arguments were better for the opposition. However, your personalities just kind of turned me off to the whole thing. I'm sorry, it was the most exciting debate, I'll be honest. But it made me want to side with the proposition. Thank you.
Okay.
That's always my comment. My comment is always when I come apart and unlikable.
Yes, sir.
I'm Daniel.
That's what I wanted to talk to you about on
Yeah.
the videotape. Yeah.
I sided with the opposition. I thought that Rana's refutation was pretty strong.